What is up, harvesters? Welcome back to Hobby Harvest to my subscribers. And if you're new here, welcome. My name is Ken. So today I want to talk to you guys about deer funnels. Now, I want to talk both about natural funnels in the woods and how you can hunt those, and then how you can create your own. So first off, I just want to establish what a funnel is. So it's pretty self-explanatory, I think. It is just something that like funnels deer through a specific area more so than just letting them kind of wander wherever they want through the woods. So first off, I want to get into what a natural funnel is. So when I think of this, there's a few things that come to mind, but on my northwestern Wisconsin property, we have a ground blind that we actually call the funnel. And the reason for that is I'll kind of give you a layout of the area. So there's like a cedar swamp down low, and there's some dry islands in there, and that's where we get a lot of our bucks to bed down. But it's surrounded by extremely steep topography. Like if you were gonna try to walk up this hill, you wouldn't be able to do it without putting a hand on the ground or grabbing hold of a tree and like pulling yourself up this big hill. So the deer themselves are also creatures of habit and creatures of efficiency, and they do not want to walk up those steep hills either. They work hard for those calories that they burn, and they don't want to burn them on something like climbing a hill when they could just very easily go on a path of less resistance. So in this specific scenario, we have a bunch of topography that like leads down into that cedar swamp, but there's an area that creates a funnel that is a lower sort of saddle between the big ridges, and that of course is right where the deer push through and end up heading off to where our food plots are. So we actually set up a ground blind where you come over the top of one of those ridges, and then there's a ground blind set up there. And the reason why we don't need a stand is you already have such high elevation down to anything that you're looking at beneath you. So you just easily slip up over the top into that ground blind. The deer never see you coming. They don't know you're there, and you are set up to get a shot on them when they come through that funnel. Now, another area that this isn't 100% natural, but the second thing that I consider sort of a natural funnel is when you have things like fence lines. So I actually have one here on my southeastern Wisconsin property. The side of one of my food plots has an old fence. I mean, it's overgrown with red osier dogwood and ivy and all sorts of like blackberry bushes and all sorts of other stuff. So you can barely even tell that it's there, but the deer know it's there. And even though the deer could very easily jump over that fence, they don't. They again are creatures of efficiency, and they will choose to walk around the fence where there's an opening instead of jumping over it and burning all of those wasted calories by doing so. So I can actually show you, they beat a deer trail right into the mud, right through where I have switchgrass trying to get established. I'll also show you guys, this isn't a switchgrass video, but this is actual first year switchgrass, and this is what first year switchgrass looks like when it goes into its first winter also. So you'll just get a nice view of what that looks like too if you guys are trying to do the switchgrass thing on your property. So what that fence though does is creates a funnel where they enter the food plot in that specific area. Now, because it's a food plot, it's already an attraction. I don't really need to worry about funneling them to it. It is the funnel itself. It's the vacuum, so to speak, that attracts them. But just a good example of how a fence will force them to move through a specific area of your property. And now when we start getting into like the man-made side of that, like yes, you can put fences up. I know some guys will put like snow fences up in their property to create almost like wing dams that sort of steer the deer to where they're going. Those of you who have fished the Mississippi know what I'm talking about with those wing dams that are under the water and kind of keep the current moving where the barges won't get stuck in the shallows of the river. But they're basically just sort of like lines that keep pushing the deer and redirecting them to where they want them to go. Now that's a lot of work, and I'm going to tell you how you can do that a lot easier. But the last thing that comes to mind when I think of naturally occurring funnels is when you have stuff like water. So deer also, I mean, they can swim, they're good swimmers, but they always choose not to if they don't have to. So if you have a deep river, you have a lake, or you have even something like a big marsh where they don't want to walk through it, they're going to walk the edges of that and stay dry if they can. So again, that's something that's going to create a funnel on your property, and you guys are probably very well aware of where these are on your property naturally, because one of the simplest things to do when you're brand new to deer hunting is just go and look where all the deer trails are, set up shop right where the most trails come together, And that's a great spot to hunt if you know absolutely nothing else about hunting. I realize you guys are here and you're trying to learn a lot more than just those very beginner steps of deer hunting, but that's the way, like, my great-grandfather hunted that way, my grandfather hunted that way. They would just figure out where the most trails came together, sit their butt in the snow, and hope that a deer walked by. And that is essentially where a funnel is. If you're seeing a bunch of trails come together, there's a reason for that, and it's probably because it's a natural funnel and they're being funneled through there for any of the reasons I listed and maybe many more. So now I want to get into like how we can actually create these on our property by ourselves and force them to move where we want them to move. Now, like I said, I already brought up that like putting fences in and creating snow fences. Now, that is something that like, yeah, you can do, but it's a bigger investment and it's a lot of work, and it just maybe makes your property not look as natural and pristine also as you're putting up all these unnatural fences and stuff through your habitat. But what we can do is, of course, create man-made deer trails. We can create, some guys call them travel corridors. What you do is you take a thick part of the woods and you cut a trail through it with a chainsaw, with just a loppers, with anything. You can just snap branches off. It only has to make it easier to move through than the rest of the surrounding area. But now, one tip when you're doing this, do not make it just a straight like shooting lane, because deer do not like to walk down a straight path for too long. And make it bend and weave so that the deer can't actually see each other. Just say there's another deer group 100 yards away. You don't want them to be able to see each other if the habitat's thick enough. You want there to be like bends and weaves in that trail, even though it's heading from point A to point B. Just don't make that a straight line that you can see the whole path, because deer just don't like being in the open. They don't like being able to see too far in one direction. And if you make a trail like that, they may actually avoid it and they may like crisscross it instead. So I use the analogy a lot. Like, we see deer cross the road all the time, but we don't ever watch them run down the middle of the road. Now, maybe, I mean, I'm not saying it's never happened, but it is by far not the norm of what happens. They're always just getting through that open space from cover to more cover as fast as possible. So they don't like being in like a big, straight, wide open area. And that goes for something just like a deer trail too, even if it's only as wide as say your shoulders are or whatever. A good thing to say when you're creating these is just make it so you can easily walk on it. I know deer are a lot shorter than we are, but just make it so you can easily walk on it. It'll be more than open enough for them. If you do want to open it up enough so you can get like an ATV through it or whatever, that's fine too, but it doesn't actually need to be all that big. Deer will squeeze through some very tight spaces. You'd be surprised. Even those big bucks with those big racks will somehow figure out how to squeeze through some very tight spots in the woods. But that's one way to do it, is just simply open up a spot through a thick part in the woods. If it's their only path through there or it's their easiest path through there, they're going to take it. So you can move them from point A to point B just by creating that easy path for them, because they are efficient creatures. They don't want to burn up a lot of calories to move through an area. So they will choose to use that one then. Now, we can also sweeten up these man-made deer trails with things like mock scrapes and water holes. So I love putting mock scrapes at least at all of my stand locations, but they can also be placed just on something like a man-made deer trail where you want to influence them to move from point A to point B. It's just going to give them that extra little reason to go down that trail instead of maybe a different one. And that is just a great way to like make them use the one you want to use. And then if you do have them using this funnel or this man-made deer trail, there's nothing to say you have to go hunt your food plot or hunt a bedding area or hunt whatever. That funnel a lot of times is your best place to hunt on your land once you have these lines of movement established and you know for certain that they are going to walk through this exact trail to get to food plot A, B, or C. Because their bedding areas are all over here, their food plots are all over here, but they will definitely walk through this spot. That is a great spot for a stand. Your stands do not have to be on your other bigger attractions. They can simply be on these corridors or these man-made deer trails, these efficient paths through the woods that you create for them. Now, the other thing we can do is make it harder for them to walk somewhere else. So like I said, we're gonna play on them being efficient creatures and wanting to take that most efficient path through the woods. So if we don't want them moving somewhere, we can make it harder for them to move there. And we can do this more naturally, or I think more easily and definitely cheaper, by like dropping trees in those areas instead of doing something like putting up a snow fence. So you can simply cut trees down, cut them off, let them lay on the ground. If you are clearing out these man-made deer trails, you might have some brush. Create your brush piles sort of in lines that are perpendicular to the way you want them to move, so that you are sort of cutting off those other paths and forcing them into that other one. Now you can hinge cut trees too. You can hinge cut them so that they keep growing, so that they don't just decay on you down into nothing. And it'll also create browse for you as well for the deer, but it'll sort of give them only one path through the woods without making them feel too trapped. So that's the other thing I want to bring up. You do not want these deer to feel like they are super trapped when they're in these areas. So don't like super wall off an area and be like, this is your only path through, because they'll just completely avoid it and go all the way around, because they do want to feel like they can escape if they need to. But when they're not pressured, when they're just slow roaming through your property, they will almost every single time take one of these paths. And then those bucks will take those paths too, especially if they're checking on does. Funny thing today, it is January 7th that I'm filming. You guys aren't gonna see this for a couple days, but my dad called me today and he told me he saw a big rack buck chasing a doe. Now, given the time of year it is right now, this is probably what would be considered the third rut. And I know most guys don't even know about the second rut, much less the third rut. But what that is like these does come into estrus every month if they weren't bred. So the rut was back at the beginning of November, the second rut beginning of December. We're now the beginning of January, so that's the third rut. So chances are it's probably a fawn, last year's fawn, this year's fawn, however you want to look at it. An 8-month-old deer at this point, and she probably was not bred in the second rut because her first estrus is cued off of her mother's that would have come into estrus in November. Her first estrus would have been December. She probably wasn't bred. She's now getting chased in January. That's always a little iffy for if she does get bred, if that fawn will survive, because it's going to be born so late in the summer that will it get big enough come winter to survive winter? Now, I am down here in southeastern Wisconsin. That's where my dad saw that happen as well today. And it is possible that down here we don't have that harsh of winters as we do, say, up on my northwestern Wisconsin property. So there is a good chance that that fawn will survive next year. Now, all of that being said, I want to get back on target here. So you can sort of force deer through the parts of the woods that you want them to go by either making it easier for them to move through there or make it harder for them to move where you don't want them to move. But always keep in mind, don't close them off too much, because you aren't going to want them to feel trapped in those areas. And that may very well mean that they do occasionally travel in a different way than you're exactly trying to force them to. You're not going to make every single deer move every single place in the woods you want it to. I think you guys are well aware of that. But we can harshly influence which way they will move. And once you put your cameras out there, you'll see what they're doing on a daily basis. You'll see, hey, I always have this doe family group travels right down this trail at exactly an hour before dark every single day. And maybe 50% of those days, there's at least one buck trailing not far behind them. And these are just things that you guys will see once you create these on your property. These are also very easy, very cheap things to create on your property. So even if you don't want to take all the time, effort, and energy to like put in food plots and work on like your hunter ingress and egress and work on your screening and working on creating huge bedding areas and all the other things, these things are super easy. Like a mock scrape is so easy to put up. I think I have it down to being able to do it in like 5 to 10 minutes at this point. And it's just super easy to put those up. It's creating these man-made deer trails is something that like my family's been doing for generations. We used to like just walk through the woods, and everywhere we walk, we'd snap branches off just so they don't whack the guy in the face who's walking behind you. And we noticed after a while of doing this that wherever we were walking in the woods, be it from one stand to the other, from the stand to the road or whatever, all of a sudden the deer started using these trails too. And we figured it out pretty quickly that it's like, well, they don't want to get whacked in the face with a branch either. So they're of course going to take the path of least resistance through the woods. And then we were able to sort of put them where we wanted the deer to go instead of where we were just naturally walking. Like we didn't necessarily want a deer to walk straight from one stand to the other or from our stand to the road, but we kind of put them off away from the stands where we would have a shot on them. And it ended up working out pretty well. And it was something just as easily as like taking your hand and snapping the branches off. And like we can walk the land now and there's still like snapped off branches everywhere that you can see. They're all dried up and they've been snapped off for years, if not decades. And it's just funny to see, and like it's created these paths that these deer walk on. So definitely something you want to do. Take full advantage of that. Now is a great time of year to do it too, because all the leaves and stuff aren't out on the branches yet. So you're not dealing with them when you're trying to like break them off and get rid of them. Or like, again, you can use a chainsaw, you can use like a loppers or a snips or something to get into them, or just a handsaw, whatever you guys can get out there, whatever you can get your hands on. It's really something that anybody can get out there and do, and it has huge benefits for you and for where you're going to see the deer, where you're going to put deer on your property, and of course hopefully give you a much better chance at harvesting whatever your goals are for your property. So if you guys feel like you got some value out of this, do me a favor, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.